right. Good morning, folks. As you get settled in, just going to go over some quick check. If this is your first Watershed Wednesday, hi, I'm Amy Wyatt from OCCA. Today we will be doing our normal Watershed Wednesday. So if you have questions, please pop them into the question and answer box. We will be sneaking a little time at the end to ask those questions to our presenters today. And if we have time, you can also use your raise hand feature, and we can open up your microphone to ask questions directly through audio later on in the presentation. So with no further ado, I'm going to hand it over to Lydia, and we will get today started.
Good morning. Thank you, everybody, for joining. I'd like to welcome you to week number 12 of Watershed Wednesdays. These are weekly sessions that are taking place at the Upper Susquehanna Watershed Forum for 2021. We're going to be holding sessions every Wednesday through October, so really we only have one left, but the full schedule is posted on our website, as well as all of the past Watershed Wednesdays should be there as well. You can sign up for email announcements for the Watershed Wednesdays, although we only have the one left, but I'm sure if you sign up for those, you may become aware of our Watershed Wednesdays series should we do it next year. My name is Lydia Brinkley. I am your host here today, along with the Otsego County Conservation Association and Amy Wyatt. To get things started, our presenters today are Shorna Allred and Christina Farrar. They will be giving a presentation called Black Rural Lives Matter, Stories of Black Rural Landowner Stewardship. Shorna Allred is an associate professor and human dimensions researcher at Cornell University Department of Natural Resources and the Environment, who studies how human social, political, and psychological processes enhance our ability to conserve and manage natural resources and encourage an open and informed exchange of ideas. Christina Farrar is the Forestry Resource Specialist at Cornell Cooperative Extension in Onondaga County, who has a special interest in landowner stewardship and decision-making. Take it over, ladies.
So thank you so much for that warm introduction, and thank you to Lydia and Amy for the invitation to speak with you as part of Watershed Wednesdays. As you know, forests are a big part of water quality and really looking at the broader ecosystem of forests and forests as a key component of watersheds. So we're really excited to talk to you today about our project Stories of Land Stewardship and Legacy in the Northeast. This was a project that was recently funded by a grant from the Cornell Rural Humanities Initiative from the Mellon Foundation. And this initiative challenged us as an institution at Cornell as a largely white loci of power and privilege to really listen, to grapple with our discomfort, to ally ourselves and work on changing our institutions in terms of racial equality. And my colleague, Christina, as well as our collaborators at University of Massachusetts, really wanted to look at our forestry extension and outreach programs and ask the question that Nobel laureate Toni Morrison asked, which is, what can I do from where I am? And so this project was really born from the question that we really asked ourselves, what can we do about really representing racial equality within our sphere of influence? And for us, it was really looking closely at our forestry extension and outreach programs. Next. And so we really wanted to embody the mantra that, change begins in many places, and it also begins at home, and really what we could do here in New York State through the Rural Black Lives Initiative. Next. So our question that we tackled is, how can we better understand minority land ownership and stewardship in the Northeast, given that there was a real lack of scholarship and outreach specifically focused on BIPOC landowners, Black, Indigenous, and people of color. Next. So in New York State, there's 19 million acres of forest land. So, 63% of our land area in New York State is covered by forests, and 74% of that is owned by over 700,000 private landowners. And so a lot of our outreach focuses on working with private forest landowners and enhancing the benefits that come from sustainably managing forest lands, such as clean air and water, carbon storage, forest products, jobs, scenic beauty, outdoor recreation, and many, many more. And according to the National Woodland Owner Survey, there's about 20,000 Black or African American forest landowners in the Northeast. That number expands if we look at all people of color, but we just wanted to get a handle on, well, how many landowners do we have in the region? And these landowners make up the backbone of civic and political life in rural communities. Black landowners in particular were some of the first to join and support the civil rights movement in the rural South. And the advantages of ownership really include personal pride, higher educational achievement of children, and overall sense of well-being. And also the social and economic independence that comes with land ownership, that it's not just a form of income, but a form of wealth and intergenerational wealth as well. Next. And according to the National Woodland Owner Survey, again, there's about 8,000 Black or African American landowners in New York State. Next. But we're actually not sure, because the response rate for Black landowners for the National Woodland Owner Survey is quite low, and so that impacts the kind of statistical representativeness of the data. And so in many ways, we actually don't know how many even landowners there are of color in the Northeast region. So this would require oversampling to really understand the extent of the population. Next. So there's a number of factors contributing to land loss and stewardship among African Americans, and many African American farmers, for example, access and discrimination was a key issue. The Pickford v. Glickman case, which is the largest civil rights class action lawsuit in U.S. history, which alleged racial discrimination against African American farmers and its allocation of loans and assistance through USDA. And so this is actually still being settled. There are vestiges of Pickford v. Glickman that are still, in the process of being paid out. And so this litigation against USDA really codified in many ways the racism and discrimination that was widespread in terms of access to government programs. And unfortunately, it led to a lot of landowners not being able to weather the storm, so to speak, when they needed farm loans or assistance. And so in that process, they lost their land. In the South in particular, heirs property or partition sales, which force the sale of land owned in common by a number of individuals when land is passed intergenerationally without a will, that can cause serious issues with forcing partition sales when you might have 80 portioned landowners of a single property. Perceived loss of heir interest in the property, and again, this legacy of access and discrimination, really not seeing the land in a positive light given past grievances. And I would say the usual suspects that face all landowners, that finding assistance, finding information, being able to access that information and navigate government programs in light of everything else they're balancing can be challenging. Next. So I'll pass it over to Christina to share about what we've been working on to understand the perspective of African-American landowners in New York State and New England.
Thanks, Shorna. So when we approached this task, our intent was to identify 7 to 10 Black landowners who owned forest and agricultural land in the Northeast and do a qualitative type study using narrative inquiry. So our intent was to identify these landowners and talk to them about their own story in their own words, and to document and share the success stories to gain more of a regional perspective about the issues that they have faced or are facing, and some strategies to combat land loss and what kind of incentives they have had for becoming landowners. So the interviews covered a wide range of topics: how they acquired their land, what their stewardship goals were or are, the kinds of obstacles they faced, and what opportunities they foresee as landowners moving forward. So to discuss the outcomes, our intended outcomes are to grow partnerships. We wanted to identify organizations that are working on minority land issues and develop and grow those partnerships for future projects. Develop a public outreach publication, sharing these stories of minority landowners in their own words and their goals, values, and needs. We intend to have a policymaker webinar towards the end of the project to engage key stakeholders, forestry professionals, natural resource professionals, agencies, and institutions, to share the success stories, what our research agenda is, and any policy recommendations that can positively impact Black and Indigenous landowners of color, and make some recommendations policy-wise to help private landowner research be more inclusive of that audience, and to develop an academic publication on the meta-analysis of literature on minority forest land ownership. Shorna had an undergraduate research assistant, Cassidy, who did quite a bit of a literature search on Black land ownership and found most of the scholarship to really be focused in the South. So this is, nobody had really compiled all this research before and with the intent of seeing what we really knew about Northeast landowners. And so we don't know very much. So we will be working with Cassidy's literature review. So in the spring and summer of 2021, our project really got going. Our team, Shorna and myself, with Paul Catanzara and Olivia Lukasik, collaboratively developed interview questions for our audience while we were seeking to identify Black landowners and asking them for participation. How do we find these Black landowners? We used a snowball sampling method between the 4 of us. We felt relatively well networked in the Northeast, and we developed a list of agencies, organizations, individual contacts, personal contacts, and reached out to them, sharing our goals and objectives, asking for assistance in identifying possible participants in our project. And so, you know, Shorna and I were focused on New York State, and Paul and Olivia were really focused on the New England states. And we reached a lot of people, but in the end, we came up with 4 landowners, and they all agreed to participate. We do hope to expand that audience in the future, but we focused on these 4 landowners this summer. We finalized our interview questions and conducted all of the interviews remotely via Zoom. And all of the landowners that participated shared their respective journeys openly and enthusiastically with us. So it was a really enjoyable experience, and a very personal experience, despite having to conduct interviews remotely, which wasn't preferred, but was the safe option this year. And I think that it was a uniquely personal experience given the digital media that we used to accomplish our task. And so we're really in the process right now of going through those interviews and writing up our stories. I pulled a couple of quotes to share, but I think the one, thought that I want to express today is all of the interviews were very rich and different and shared different stories and experiences. Not everybody came upon their land in the same way. Some inherited it, some purchased it. We have farmers, we have just a forest landowner. And every single experience is different, as you would expect. And it was really interesting to discuss the role of race and how that impacted, or how they, thought that impacted their journey and decision-making along the way. Paul Turner, this is a picture of Paul and Tracy Turner, who are New Hampshire landowners. They have a farm and raise horses as well as a woodlot. Paul shared this experience where people say, oh, well, where are you from? Town residents. Are you from the city? And he shared, I'm not. I'm like, no, I'm not. Why would you assume that I am? And I would say that's probably the biggest disconnect that people have, is to assume that if you're Black, you live in a city or want to live in a city. So, the sharing a rural land ethic with the community, part of their story was that they were asked, well, what is your intent? What do you want to do with this land? When they purchased their property and moved to live in their small New Hampshire community. And they shared, well, we want to enjoy it. We want our neighbors to enjoy it. And that shared value system, provided a lot of support for them as they became established residents in that community. Sydney, Antonio, this is Sydney and Evan. Antonio, they are New York landowners. This picture is about 10 years old. This is Sydney's daughter and granddaughter. Her granddaughter is now a student at Vassar. So we'll be getting some more current pictures for our publication. But Sydney inherited her mother's property that is in the Columbia Greene County area. And she has such a wonderful, colorful story about her childhood and how her family came to own that property. And that it had a lot to do with her experience, not so positive experience at camp, where she didn't like the structure that they forced upon them at camp. So she hitchhiked home to Brooklyn and demanded to stay home for the summer instead. So really great stories. And it was very clear that her grandmothers seriously valued land as an asset, as wealth, intergenerational wealth. And she remembers her grandmother telling her, they're not making any more land. And she didn't understand that, of course, as a child, but as she grew up and took an increasing interest in that property and came to own that property later in her life. And that was through navigating some difficult discussions with other family members who felt that the property should be sold. Those lessons from an older generation about the importance of land and its role in building wealth really stayed with her and kind of shaped her land ethic and goals and objectives as an adult and as the owner of that property. And probably the best quote that we pulled is "Selfishness allows for altruism," which the context of that was really interesting. We were talking about ecosystem services and, as landowners, what a big contribution they make to their community and to society by, keeping their forest as forest, letting it filter water and provide high water quality to communities, the aesthetics, the clean air, and all of the values that forests provide to everyone. And, her take on that was, because they love that property and want to hold on to that property and not sell it, she classified that as a type of selfishness. It allows them to be altruistic and provide services for the rest of the community. So really interesting thoughts about the role of being the landowner in the community. And also, in this case, the importance of intergenerational ideas and land ethic. So as we move towards the fall, right now we are going through our interview transcripts, writing up interviews with a focus on telling the stories as authentically as possible. We really want them to come through as in the voice of each of those landowners that we talk to. We are fortunate to have a collaboration with Northern Woodlands Magazine. They have contributed a photographer to the project who is photographing each landowner and their property. And we'll be selecting from those photos to really show the spirit of each of these landowners on their own property. And we are involving the landowners in the review of their stories and in choosing their photographs to make sure that their unique experience and perspective is clear and comes through in that outreach publication. And we do intend for that to come out in December or January. Of course, future outreach is a major goal moving forward beyond the scope of this project. We hope to share the publication with professionals. I mentioned that webinar that we would like we'll be doing later in the year. We want to be working with people that work with private landowners, including institutions and agencies that have historically contributed to the separation of Black landowners from their land, whether it be directly or indirectly, so that the programs that they have and that they develop in the future can be more inclusive, can consider the history, past grievances, make corrections and improvements moving forward. We also hope to collaborate with organizations who are working with BIPOC landowners to further enrich our reach and perspective on this project moving forward. And so we will be seeking additional funding to expand our ability to interview more landowners and tell their stories, and in turn help professionals, institutions, and agencies be more inclusive of all landowners. And that's all I have for you today. Shorna and I would be happy to take some questions if there are questions.
At this point, folks, feel free to pop your questions into the Q&A box, or if you'd like to ask your question directly, just use the raise hand feature and I'll open up your microphone.
Thanks for that. I will ask a quick question while people may be formulating theirs. Did you ask these landowners and get any information from them as to if they, utilize state and federal programs for their land?
Yeah, that was definitely something that we asked because we wanted to find out how they were connected with kind of existing and available programs. And some of them were, and some were sort of just learning about them. And so that was definitely something that we learned throughout this process, is that not it. And the landowner, one of the landowners was a new landowner. He had just acquired his property. So, and he did not come from a kind of forestry background at all. So it was really starting from ground zero in terms of learning everything about his woodlot and how to manage it. You know, and he did indicate it was pretty challenging to kind of understand the federal and state programs that were available, and actually did a lot of his own self-learning through YouTube, instructional videos that were posted by organizations, a lot of organizations in the South, on YouTube. So I think online education should be kind of a part of what we think about moving forward.
Fantastic. We do have one question here. This is from T. Hansen, as saying, first off, such valuable work. How can other orgs get involved?
Yes, thank you for that. If you're interested, I'll put my contact information. Shorna's is right here. And you can contact either of us, and we'd be happy to talk with you about this project and our plans for future project and what interests you in particular. So we would love to hear from you if you'd like to get involved or are interested.
How did you even get these landowners involved? Like, how did you find these landowners?
So we did that snowball sampling technique, which I didn't know it had a name, but we basically used our network and came up with a list of contacts, basically, that some were organizational contacts, some were personal contacts, and then decided among the four of us who the best person was to reach out to that contact. And we developed an ask and emailed all of these people or called them, asking for assistance in identifying Black or African-American landowners. And surprisingly, we didn't get a lot of response other than, I don't know any. I talked to an organization here that I worked with pretty regularly, and the director, had been in place and for more than 10 years. And that person said, I have never met a Black landowner during my tenure in this organization. That basically every single member, it was a professional association. Everybody was a forest landowner. So really surprising. And as Shorna mentioned, we really have no way of knowing if the, statistic from the National Woodland Owner Survey on New York, Black land ownership is accurate. We really, the four landowners, I think we came up with 5 landowners, and one of them was not able to do it due to illness. But not an easy task. And we certainly hope to expand this to Indigenous landowners and landowners of color if we're able to source that funding and expand this project. And I think collaboration with organizations that are already working with people of color on the land can really help enhance our reach. But for this small project, it really was not easy to do. Shorna, do you have anything to add to that?
No, I think you covered it. It was interesting. We asked the question of every landowner we interviewed trying to snowball to say, do you know any other African-American or landowners of color? And each of them said no. So, that's what we would love to do in the next phase of this project, is really connect these landowners with each other and really think about and also how our existing why are we not seeing more landowners of color in existing kind of forestry organizations and associations? So how can we, make those organizations more inclusive and really accessible to a broader array of landowners? And I put, Christina, your email in the chat for
Thanks, Shorna.
those that would like to follow up, and I'll put mine as well.
Thank you so much, Christina and Shorna, for joining us today and for that fantastic presentation. I am just sharing our next week's last Watershed Wednesday for 2021. So hopefully we will see you all there to join us for another great presentation. Again, thank you for this presentation. And if anyone has any questions, feel free to reach out directly. But we hope that you have a wonderful day, and we'll see you all next week.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, everybody.